The numbers quickly grew, and within a month, the dancing epidemic had claimed 400 new individuals, twisting, turning, hopping, and leaping on the Strasbourg streets.
And we are back with a part 2. Welcome back, Top 10 fam. I hope you're having a good day and taking care of yourselves. Modern medicine is outstanding to say the least, especially after you hear some of these stories. From crazy tales to embarrassing and cruel procedures to some pretty evil doctors. Today we have a list that covers all this and more. I'm your host Raechel Fisher, and join me as we count down our list of top 10 dark things doctors refuse to talk about. Part 2. Number 10, Don't Let Me Die. The first story was from allnurses.com and recounts a terrifying encounter that sent chills down everyone's spine. Obviously, someone had to spill the tea in order for us to get the story, okay? I'm fully aware of the title and the hypocrisy of me telling stories with the things they refuse to talk about, but here we are. Okay? The story goes as follows. While treating a patient with a variety of illnesses, the nurses treating him realized the sad reality that he wasn't going to make it. However, the man was desperate to stay alive. Every time his heart monitor beeped, he would grab and scratch at the nurses to keep him alive and would scream, "Don't let me die," over and over and over again. Then, one night when the nurse was rushing in to address the calls, she saw the man floating above the bed 2 inches high. He was laughing, but not in a voice she recognized, and his face was contorted in a sick, dark smile. He laughed at the nurse and said, and I quote, "You stupid witches aren't going to let me die, are you?" Unquote. After that, he went into cardiac arrest and passed away 20 minutes later. 5 minutes after that, the patient apparently sat back up, started laughing, and a voice said, "You let him die, too bad." An agonizing scream then filled the hall, and the words, "Don't let me die," echoed through the unit. It wasn't until the morning the voices stopped. Nobody went anywhere by themselves after that. Number 9, the dancing plague. As preposterous as it sounds, the dancing plague was a real thing. Like, it actually happened. And it's so ridiculous, doctors prefer to leave it in the history books. Let's just not talk about that. In Strasbourg in July 1518, a woman named Frau Trophia kicked off in the middle of the square and started twisting and shouting repeatedly, kind of crazily. For about a week, she continued alone until 40 people joined her. Then that number shot up to 400 in the next month. Physicians were flummoxed, bamboozled, confused, dare I say. Though they at first encouraged it by bringing professional dancers in and a band. They thought it was due to the hot blood and depression that plagued the community. But then people started dancing so hard they died of strokes and heart attacks. What started out as a spontaneous jig transformed into a toxic tango. It sounds so fake, it really does. It sounds like something straight out of Hocus Pocus, like Bette Midler, where were you? But it is in fact a well-documented event. There are portraits, there are paintings, it's insane. One explanation is ergo, a fungus found on rye that produces hallucinations and spasms. It could have infected the crops, causing widespread hysteria. That's one explanation, but we don't know. Number 8, putrid finger syndrome. Have you ever been so fed up with a Rubik's Cube you never want to see or hear of one ever again? Yeah, that's how doctors must feel about unsolved cases. Or not. But, maybe. But in any case, this story is absolutely crazy. If you're someone who hates smelling bad, well, this would be a nightmare. 5 years after a 29-year-old patient pricked his finger on a chicken bone, he developed an infection that made his arm smell like it was death itself, literally just dying. It smelled so bad, the scent could fill a banquet hall. Doctors and nurses had to go in intervals to treat him because the smell was just so bad. Imagine being the patient. Oh god. No matter what treatments they gave him, doctors couldn't solve it. They didn't know what the bacteria was. But before it could be identified, the man made a miraculous recovery. The infection just cleared up all of a sudden. Perhaps something the doctors did helped it, but nothing could be confirmed, so he just went on his merry way with his arm back to normal. Number 7. Boar, Bile, Enemas. Fair warning, we are entering the portion of this list where we talk about healthcare practices no one wants to talk about ever again, because they were so horrendous. But today it's my job to remind you of the Boar bile enema. While enemas are common practice today to flush out our number 2 issues, this one used a unique substance. Clysters were a medieval device, just like this, that doctors used to perform an enema. But instead of water, they used a concoction of boar bile. And if you don't know what a boar is a kind of like crazy pig. How they got the bile, we don't know. But hey, at least they kept things interesting. What evidence they had for the effectiveness of boar bile over just like plain water, we will never know. But nevertheless, this method was hugely popular for King Louis XIV of France, who had over 2,000 of these procedures administered over the course of his reign. Some even while he was sitting on his throne, and we're not talking about the toilet throne, we're talking about like his actual throne in the middle of everything. So if you ever dreamt of visiting Versailles back in its glory days, maybe reconsider the idea. Fun fact, oftentimes nobles would just like relieve themselves in the middle of the hall. So Versailles was like, Hall of Mirrors was not something you'd want to step into. Just saying. Number 6, a hot iron where? While heat has many medicinal uses, I think you will be horrified to learn where and how they used to use it. Yes, extreme heat can stop bleeding to help by cauterizing a wound, or a nice heat pad can ease muscles. But back in medieval times, people like to use like hot pokers to treat a lot of issues such as venereal diseases and hemorrhoids, meaning that they often administered searingly hot pokers to tender areas of the body in order to burn off ailments. Surprise, it wasn't very effective. However, the other option was also uncomfortable. You had to sit on a rock called St. Fiacrius' rock. Apparently, it cured a 17th century Irish monk's hemorrhoids. So, hot poker on your bottom, or you sit on a rock for an indefinite amount of time. Tough choice. Finally though, in the 12th century, a Jewish physician suggested a hot bath to help, and today we can be thankful for ointment. Number 5, medical astrology. What's your star sign? The dreaded first date question. When's your birthday? Astrology is one of those pseudoscientific but also weirdly accurate things that occupies our everyday TikTok FYPs, or at least mine. Ooh, I just revealed too much. But did you know that many doctors were not just considered miraculous because of their medical practices, but they'd often predict the weather, they could tell you what personality your child would have, and advised on crops. By the 1500s, doctors were legally required to assess a patient's horoscope before they did anything in terms of treatment of their medical issues. They would use astrological information to see how the sun, moon, and planets would affect the human body. After their star chart was taken into account, then a diagnosis and treatment plan could be made. In modern times, pseudoscience PhDs are very much a thing, which many aforementioned doctors don't like talking about, so make sure you do your research. Number 4. Speaking of which, the Starvation Doctor. And now we move on to the portion of the list where doctors have tainted the names of being a doctor and can no longer claim to be any such thing. One such awful person was Linda Burfield Hazard. Just like the aforementioned pseudoscience practitioners, Linda wasn't a proper medical doctor. In fact, she earned her license through a loophole that allowed practitioners of alternative medicine into the field. By most accounts that I can find, she was a swindler, a crook, a quack, and her horrendous methods resulted in the death of 40 people. She wrote 2 books, one called Fasting, or the Cure of Disease, and Scientific Fasting, the Ancient and Modern Key to Health. She believed that all illnesses were a result of excessive eating and that you had to starve yourself for months to stave off disease. She created her own sanitarium where patients would fast for days, weeks, months, accompanied by massages that were more like beatings. All she allowed them to eat was tomato juice, asparagus juice, and a teaspoon of orange juice occasionally. No wonder she was called the Starvation Doctor. Even worse, in order to assert her power, she'd have her patients declared mentally insane if they wanted to leave. Eventually, she was convicted of manslaughter in 1912, thank goodness, sentenced to hard labor, but was pardoned 2 years later for unknown reasons, moved to New Zealand and tried to practice there, but there her license was revoked for lack of credentials. Way to go, New Zealand. Number 3, Vickie Dawn Jackson. Going to the doctor is scary enough, and so is leaving the ones you love in their care. Doctors are superhuman who put everything they have and more into caring about our lives. Who can say less after the past 2 years? So when people like Vickie Dawn Jackson existed, why would anyone want to talk about them? Jackson worked in a small town in North Texas as a nurse in the hospital there. She was described as sweet, kind, generous, hardworking, a dedicated nurse, and that she was, until something inside her snapped. Between December 2000 and February 2001, a series of respiratory deaths affected the elderly in addition to middle-aged patients in the hospital. No one suspected anything sinister until one of the other nurses discovered that their stock of mivacurium had significantly decreased. Mivacurium is a drug used to temporarily stop a patient's ability to breathe when they insert like the tube down your throat, which therefore implied more sinister events were occurring. Another nurse named Donna McIver noticed that every time an unruly patient would act out, she recalled that Vickie would say, "I'll take care of it," or "I'll fix it." She also knew all the victims and had some really negative relationships with some of them who had treated her poorly. No one could believe it was Vickie. She was the most caring nurse at the hospital, but little did they know that she was the angel of death. Number 2, Harold Shipman. Another man who taints the name of doctor. Shipman was an English doctor who should have never ever gotten his degree or a job in the first place. It just blows my mind that he did. He failed his entrance exam, which should have ended things there, but he somehow managed to actually earn a placement, and though he got into the profession for a noble cause to honor the death of his mother, he did the exact opposite in his career. He was fired from his first placement for forging prescriptions, another reason his career should have stopped. I think that's what bothers me the most about this case, is that there were so many ways 260 lives could have been saved. But no, another practice, Donnybrook Medical Center in Hyde, took him in. If it weren't for the local undertaker and Angela Woodruff, he might have never been caught. He noticed that Shipman's patients were always found sitting or reclined on a couch or sofa. Then on top of that, Angela Woodruff's mother died, leaving behind a will giving everything to Shipman. Angela's mother had just been to see Shipman that day, highlighting an all too deadly pattern. Shipman was lethally injecting each patient before they left his office, giving them just enough time to pass away when they got home. Pure evil. And lastly, number 1, Walter Freeman. Did you know that the man who invented the lobotomy used an ice pick from his own kitchen? Lobotomies themselves, as well as shock therapy, sound like the kind of treatments only evil doctors would use, but strangely enough, they actually are still practiced today. Lobotomies, however, it's really rare, but ECT, it's used quite often. At one time, Freeman was revered across America as being the first man to perform a prefrontal lobotomy. He would use electroshock therapy, ECT, to knock the patient out, and then Freeman would go in there and literally remove part of their brain, blindly. This would often leave patients in a vegetative state, which was preferred by the doctors because the patients were not acting out. This dude was either power hungry or something, but considering the obvious fact that it didn't work, it didn't fix anything, and 490 people died, he just kept pushing it. He modified the procedure and traveled around in what he called his lobotomobile and demonstrated the procedure across the country. He even went on to perform this horrendous, poorly researched treatment on Rosemary Kennedy at age 23, who sadly fell into an incurable vegetative state. But I kind of feel like he got a little bit of karma when he performed the procedure in the media, and in one instance the patient died right before their eyes. After years of this utter mania, his license was finally revoked and he died of cancer when he was 76 or something like that. Yeah, no punishment at all for his just horrendous procedure with no medical backing. Good for you, man. And that was our top 10 list for the day. If you like this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, follow, do the thing. I've been your host, Raechel Fisher, and until next time, guys, take care.